Welcome back. We are poised to begin part 2 of today, and I'm very pleased to introduce John Schneider, who will be offering his presentation on Harry Partch, Radical Innovator. A few words about John before we begin. John Schneider is a Grammy Award-winning and 4-time Grammy-nominated guitarist, composer, author, and broadcaster whose weekly television and radio programs have brought the guitar into millions of homes. Holds a PhD in music and physics from UC Cardiff in UK, a music degree from the University of California and the Royal College of Music, London, and is past president of the Guitar Foundation of America. He's released over 20 CDs and written dozens of articles on the guitar, while his The Contemporary Guitar has become the standard text in the field. He has performed in Europe, Asia, and throughout North America, and been featured by New Music America, the Camera Society, Southwest Chamber Music, New American Music Festival, Los Angeles Philharmonic, San Francisco Symphony, Other Minds, and the BBC. He is a founding artistic director of Microfest, the music ensemble Just Strings, Partch Ensemble, and founder of Microfest Records, while his records can be found on The Bridge, Cambia, etc., Innova, Microfest, Mode, and many other labels. He can be heard weekly on Pacifica Radio, the Global Village, and we see the address down there. Let us all welcome John Schneider.
To the basement of Mills College in 1952. That's the room where he wrote this piece we're listening to, Castor and Pollux. And this is just part of Castor and Pollux. What I want to talk about today is that, of course, we all know, having even listened to everyone talking, Harry Partch was a great innovator at so many different levels. And it goes without saying that the tuning systems, the instruments, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to do a quick overview of those just in case people aren't completely involved with all that. And then move into his inventions, this concept of multi-layering pieces, of a triple exposure piece. He wasn't the first person to do it. I mean, Darius Milhaud did a double exposure. His quartet number 8 can be played with quartet number 9 to make an octet. Tough thing to do, right? But Harry went on to use this concept in all sorts of ways. He also, technically, in terms of the recording arts, he was way ahead of the curve on so many things. I mean, the fact that he was one of the first to have an eponymous ensemble. Of course, he had to, because every time he moved, he had to make a new band, because who the hell else could play his instruments, right? So he did a lot of technical innovations. We know him as a composer, as a theorist, et cetera, et cetera. But how you turn something like this into something like this. That's all 3 layers going simultaneously. We'll find out how. And as Harry would often say, this is how. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. So, of course, it famously began when he taught himself all about just intonation through the Helmholtz book that he found in a library. He went to Southern California to become a piano virtuoso and lasted 6 months in the theory course. And after 6 months of learning how to resolve a dominant 7 chord, he said, I'm out of here. Eventually, all his amazing ideas ended up, after many different versions, in Genesis of the Music. This is the first version. And if you've never heard him describe it before, this is the famous scale.
I'm going to play a scale up and down. This is a scale of 1 octave.
that performance was done in 1942 at Eastman, and what I didn't include in that recording is the nervous giggles of the students. It's like, what just happened? Oh my God. They were pretty amazed. And of course, Harry's biggest problem was, that was his Chromelodian, of course. The original version that he had looked a little bit like this. It had a keyboard that was a generalized keyboard, and all of his ratios were color coordinated. It's just insane. He tried to make one of these. It didn't quite happen, but he at least got something made. But the first real instrument that he got going was this guy, the adapted viola.
This is the first instrument I adapted for this system. It is a viola, has a viola body with a very long neck, and the indications for 43 tones to be octave on the fingerboard. The elongation is for the purpose of making stops easier to get. It's tuned an octave below the 5 G, D, A, E, and is therefore between the viola and the cello in range.
And yes, he used vibrato. So the picture next to it, he was at Caltech talking to them to try to perhaps help him build one of these things. They said, thank you very much, but that didn't happen. But there's a close-up of the fingerboard itself. He used brad to divide not into all 43, but into 29 of the divisions. And then there's also these little parallel lines that he inset and scratched into the fingerboard, and that would allow him to find the in-betweeners. A real interesting challenge. His second instrument was a guitar where he took off the fingerboard completely, put down a brass plate, cut slots in it, and then had stainless steel frets that he would put in. When he wanted a note there, he would put it there. If he wasn't going to use it, he didn't use it. So it's a pretty strange look, actually. But he also described this instrument.
43 slots or frets as I want to use them. Because of its tuning, I can't do it. I can't play it as a guitar. I play it as a ukulele.
These are the open strings now, right? That was not Harry playing. I dropped in the demonstration, right? So by 1941, he had 4 instruments. He built it. How in the world do we pronounce it? Is it kithara? Is it kithara? If you say it in Greek, it's something else entirely, right? Yeah, maybe not. And it only had 72 strings, 12 sets of 6 hexads. Imagine, if you will, 12 guitars lined up this way. And the soundboards were inside of this thing, which was a total disaster acoustically. And we're going to get to that because he solved that problem. There's his original chromatic organ using those crazy dots and things. This never spoke, but he made the instrument itself. There's the guitar, there's the viola. When you get up close and look at the guitar, you can see those stainless steel frets are just insane, right? And they had to have been really sharp, too. Mm-hmm. He got rid of this whole system very soon after this. But it's intriguing, and those are the only frets you need to play barstow.
Number 1.
This is him playing in that hall in 1942.
January 26th. I'm free. Ed Fitzgerald, age 19, 5 feet 10 inches, black hair, brown eyes. Going home to Boston, Massachusetts. It's 4, and I'm hungry and broke. I wish I was dead.
I wish I had that recording 20 years ago. because I had no idea, that picture, I didn't have access to it, so I actually made the guitar you saw last night, just reverse engineering from the score. I thought, well, I want to play the piece, I only need these notes, I'll just put those frets in, and I'll be damned if that isn't exactly what he used to do. So that's pretty cool stuff. A few years later, so that was 1941, he ended up doing this amazing piece of music. Remember those instruments that you saw in back in Big Sur, using only the guitar, and the chromelodeon. U.S. highball, the original version. Oh, I lied. Not the original version. The second version. The original was for just solo guitar and voice for a half an hour. Yeah, I'm glad he orchestrated it. Two different voices, the subjective and the objective voices.
May God's blessings be upon you. And that's why I'm going to Chicago.
That recording was made in 1946. But that same year, back in 1943, he did 1944. He wrote the piece in 43. In 1944, he went to Quincy Porter's house, right? NEC. He was the guy, and Porter was a real fan. And Harry wanted to he was trying to get money constantly. So in order to raise money from either the Carnegie or the Guggenheim, he needed recordings. So folks, he actually made an overdubbed sound-on-sound recording of that piece. First, he laid down the voice and the guitar part. How did he do that? Well, he did it on one of these. Two of these. Because the whole point is these are acetate discs, right? And you cut it on one, and then you play it back, and then you also record at the same time. I mean, this is 1944. Now, Les Paul had sort of messed around with this in the 1930s, but he said, forget it, it's not going to work. But back and forth, he actually was able to create a 4-channel disc, bouncing back and forth. He made the discs, he sent them off to the Guggenheim, and no one has seen them since. We're just so dying for someone to discover that. Now, the recording we just heard of him at Eastman, that was only rediscovered 5 years ago. So it's got to be somewhere, right? Pretty exciting stuff. Now, of course, the whole concept, that's 1944, but it took a while. In 1947, Les Paul, it took him over 500 acetate discs bouncing back and forth to make this. And of course, Les Paul went on to basically figure out how to do not only sound on sound, but multi-tracking, thanks to Bing Crosby, who bought him 2 Ampexes, right? And the rest of that is kind of history. So, 1944, Harry Partch is at Carnegie Hall, and he gave this extraordinary performance. And what I found out recently, that evidently everything was mic'd. There were microphones everywhere. You couldn't hear the damn guitar because it was so quiet, right? His guitar, if you read the reviews, I can't remember which one of the reviewers said, Partch's voice is okay, but he kept looking down to find out where to put his fingers on the guitar, right? Too bad he didn't have a voice mic on it. So it turns out that, sure enough, he's one of the first composers that really amplified instruments a lot. There's the guitar, and right next to it is a 15-inch Jensen speaker in its own cabinet, and he used an amplifier from a record player. What did he use for a microphone? He took the needles out of a pickup from a recorder and screwed it to the back of that instrument. And voila, it got loud, right? You remember that guitar with the stainless steel frets? He ended up doing something else with that completely and changed that same fingering and stringing to this wild and crazy instrument. This in 1945, he also made another guitar, a slide guitar. I guess he got tired of hurting his fingers, right? So this guitar is pretty intriguing. It had 2 pickups on it. This is just a regular jazz guitar pickup, actually meant to go in a round sound hole. This is a tap plate that had a tin foil underneath it and a microphone. Because if you saw that show last night, I was clicking all the time and knocking on the guitar. He had a special pickup there ready to go and 2 lines out going to an amplifier. This is amazing. I mean, this is like mid-40s, right? 1945. Like I said, he was kind of way ahead of the curve. Now, let's go back and take a look at this guitar, which was, these are all called adapted guitars, right? This 10-string guitar, he added 4 mandolin tuners to the regular 6, and he got 10 strings, but it was still acoustic until 1950. He wrote a letter to some weirdo, some guy who had invented an electric guitar in California called Leo Fender. You may have heard of him. Well, if you know the old Esquire, you see that pickup? Leo Fender built a custom pickup for Harry Partch. Sounded pretty good. That's the U tonality, but with a little scordatura. He kept, of course, adapting different instruments, including so many chromolodians. It was quite extraordinary. We saw a picture of that 5-octave one that he used in Carnegie Hall. This is a 6-octave instrument, which he later added a 7th octave of sub-bass notes. How about this fingerboard? The issue, of course, is that an octave with 43 notes per the octave is that many piano keys apart, and he got tired of not being able to handle some of those chords. So he made this, monstrosity. And that only took 2 octaves of keyboard in order to get all 43 notes in. Pretty amazing stuff. But then he said, necessity being the mother of invention, the problem was he had a limited number of instruments, but he had bigger ideas, so he would find sneaky ways to change things. For example, this is an 88-key pump organ. And what he ended up doing, there are 3 rows of reeds in it, and one of the, I'll let him tell you. He did something really interesting.
The ordinary reed organ or harmonium has 2 sets of reeds. Here is one section of 24 consecutive levers or keys that I will play downward chromatically.
Consecutive keys. WTF.
Now exactly the same 24 lever section playing downwards chromatically using the 2nd set of reeds.
The 43-tone scale. Put them together.
And finally, the same 24 lever section playing downwards chromatically using both sets of reeds together. Each tone of the one set is in a small number frequency relationship to the other set in just intonation, of course.
Why would he do such a thing? Not just to do something cool, because there were some moments where he didn't have enough fingers to play the chords he wanted to hear. So, just switch the keys. Now listen, I've built 3 of these things, and for him to say in the instructions, oh, for this piece, I want you to remove all of these reeds and so let's move on to a year or so later, and this piece, Castor and Pollux. Now, these instruments, of course, were built sometime between 1945 and 1950, and using them all, some pretty extraordinary stuff happened. We don't have time for him to explain the whole thing, so I'm going to do it for him. There's the first page of Castor and Pollux. And you'll notice, if you can you see it up there? There are 3 duets. The first duet is between the Kithara and the bowls. The second duet, which happens exactly 2 minutes later, notice that they're all over one another, so it's exactly the same tempo, the same, he goes between 4/4 and 5/4, 4/4 and 5/4. The next duet is between the harmonic canon and the high bass marimba. The third duet is between the diamond marimba. Wait, why talk about it? That's what we opened with, right? Okay, and after 2 minutes, 2 new instruments. Pace is exactly the same, right? And it makes good musical sense. Now we get to the third one. Diamond marimba and bass marimba. Previous duo had the high end of the bass marimba. Now this is the low end. Put them all together. It's amazing. Now remember, Castor and Pollux are the twins, right? So there's also Pollux. So the second half of the piece is exactly the same process. 2, 2, 2. But the music is different. It's totally different. And this time he toggles between 3/4 and 4/4. And different pairings, too. The first paired out, low bass marimba, and not with hands instead of with mallets. The second duet, harmonic canon, so it's strings and glass. The third duet, diamond marimba is now played with sticks instead of mallets, right, the other end of the mallet. And of course, it all fits together. Now, what we were looking at was the 1968 score that he recopied. But the original one, you may notice on the left, there are the duos. He asked for 2 instruments and 2 dancers. Was he an innovator? Oh, yeah. So when 2 instruments played, 2 dancers came out. They all left. 2 new instruments, 2 new dancers with a completely new choreography. Same thing happened to 3. And guess what? 6 instruments, 6 dancers. Pretty wild. Now this piece has been played, it's been choreographed 9 different times since 1957, the latest being 2021. And I have to admit, we've played in 5 of those performances. Some of them are the historic choreographies from way back in the 1950s. And only the one in 2006, you can see up at the upper right-hand corner, which we did at Disney Hall. It's the first choreography where the dancers actually do exactly what they did before. All the other choreographies, except for the one that just happened in 2021, that did a bit of that. When the sextet came along, they said, too hard. I'm just going to have them do something else, right? Because it's a tough thing to do, to say the least. So, by the way, talking about tech and recording, the first recording of Castor and Pollux he did with 2 players, and he did it with 2 Ampexes. This is back in 1951. Sound on sound. He was doing all sorts of recording stuff years before anybody else did. It's pretty wild stuff. In Wind Song from 1958, he was commissioned to do the music for Madame Turtelot's film, and she found the whole process of him making the soundtrack so interesting. She made a film of it called Music Studio 1958, which is fascinating to watch. And there she is with the tape recorder. I don't know if you can see it, but basically, this is how Harry talks about it. This piece was, if you can barely read his writing here, conceived and scored for a single instrumentalist on all parts through multiple recording techniques with no more than 3 simultaneous parts at any time. That is, a first recording and 2 editions. He put the whole thing together. He did it in 3 weeks. I think he slept about 2 hours to do that whole thing, which is pretty amazing. So he also did another little trick, of course. Now, we all know about Les Paul doing his, you notice when we heard that piece, how did some of the guitars were really high and some of them were very low. Well, he learned that if you record it slowly and play it back quickly, you get the octave transpositions, right? So he would do it both ways, go way high and way low. Harry did the same thing. And in the score, for example, for Wind Song, it says right here, for this instrument, you want to record it at this. That's going up and down on a harmonic canon. But you're supposed to play it back like this. And compositionally, he uses both. He starts with the normal one, and then it morphs into the high one, and then comes back again. Sorry, that was the... There we go. Play it. There we go. And then back to the original again. Well, think about it from a composer's point of view. I have a single set of instruments. I've got a film, I've got a score. I want more different sounds. How can I do that? Necessity, right? He says, well, I can use that trick. He also did it with this piece. Let me see, back here. Yeah. Record it a tempo, but then, in context, they are way up high, right? Sounds totally natural, actually. But notice the context. Kithara, chords. We'll get some screaming chronolodian in a minute. he famously recorded this piece after his Whitney performance in New York City in 1969, 8?
Or I think four.
Not that early, really. 60s. And guess what he had on stage? A tape recorder. And he had somebody cued who knew exactly what to do, and there was paper tape in between, and the tempos, they tried to keep it exactly right. Okay. Now, Respighi had a little turntable with a bird singing on it way back in the 1920s, and people were shocked. You can't do that, right? Well, why not? Right? So here's Harry all those years later. So now let's take that concept of multi-tracking, of multi-versions, of multiple exposures, and move to 1966 with his insanely complex piece on the seventh day petals fell in Petaluma, recorded in Petaluma, California. So can you see all these guys? There's all the duets. Now, what did he do in 1952? Okay, we had 6 instruments, and they all played at the same time, and everything came together, and the timbres worked and all that stuff. This is a whole different serving of tapioca, as he would say. So look at it. This time he's got, there's 23 one-minute duets, but then you go back to the top again, and then you've got verse 24. It's going to be these two together, these two together, these two together, and then we get 3 together. And this music, well, let's take a look at the charts, and you'll see exactly what I mean. It's just extraordinary. So, for example, oh, no, sorry, I missed one. Let's start at the beginning. So the first duet sounds like this. Time signature, can you see it? He always put his time signatures in diamonds. 5.5. Oh, what tempo? Let me see. 120. Okay. Now remember, Castor and Pollux, everybody was playing in the same meter, in the same tempo, ready to go. The second duet, thank you very much, is in 2016, and 5/16/46. Sometimes I get killed this program. There we go. Okay, the tempo's different. The meter's different. Are those two possibly going to talk to each other? Well, weirdly, yes. It works. Okay, let's try another one then. It gets a little more complex. This time we have adapted guitar and Mazda marimba, which is a marimba made out of eviscerated light bulbs of all sizes. Highly amplified, by the way, because you can barely hear it. Okay, at least the tempos match, kind of 120 and 60. They're related. And each duet is its own world. It's a complete 1-minute composition. These are sketches, of course. jump to the big one, the septet. This is just wild. We've got 5.5, 4, and 4. Okay, tempos. At least they all have the same tempo. But this is, well, some people would call this cacophony. The timbres are wildly divergent, but mostly struck at this point. Short attacks instead of and for our third, yeah, you can dance to it, right? Put on your seatbelts. This was specifically a composition. They were written as sketches for Delusion of the Fury, what followed this. But it's meant to be, I mean, we saw that, I didn't point it out, let's come back here. Here he is recording them. He's got his funky headphones on, there's Michael Ranta doing it. These are all overdubs. This was meant to be tape music. That's the way it exists. It does not exist as a performance live. However, it's been done live, and we're doing it in 2 years in Los Angeles. It was done in Seattle a couple of years ago. It is a logistical nightmare, and when it comes together, it's amazing, to say the least. So to quickly kind of recap all the amazing things, we haven't even begun to talk about things like tuning. Obviously, he changed the world of tuning. And 43 notes, as you know, was just the tip of the iceberg. As he said, sometimes I use far more than 43 notes. Sometimes I use fewer. And he threatened finally to make a composition with only one note per object, right? So his instruments design, we didn't even talk about all those. The only ones I showed you today were the adapted ones. Everything else looks like Dr. Seuss made them himself, right? You know, the cloud chamber bowls, the cone gongs, the spoils of war. It's just extraordinary. Again, in terms of tech, yeah, sound on sound, amplification. First to ever make an electric fretless guitar and use it in recordings. We haven't even begun to talk about the concept of corporeality. One little idea here, because way back when, he hated the fact that people were just sitting around counting measures and then playing and dressed like penguins. Nowadays, Eighth Blackbird, any modern ensemble, they become the music, right? He was thinking about this way, way, way back there. At no time are players of my instruments to be unaware that they are on stage and in the act. There can be no humdrum playing of notes in the bored belief that just because they are good musicians, their performances are ipso facto masterly. When a player fails to take full advantage of his role in a visual or active sense, he is muffing his part, in my terms, as thoroughly as if he bungled every note in the score. That's a great concept. He's the first one to really articulate it and really make it happen. And of course, then there's this amazing multiple exposure form. The man was amazing.
The creative man will rise above. He will transcend the mutilations. For every deeply sincere offering, there is a corresponding deep and sincere hunger. Not the European chauvinism of New York, nor the mindless caterwauling of Hollywood recording studios, nor the resell by the yard. Smooth music people can suppress ego. True creativity is present. It is here because man is here in his true, deep self, unmutilated.
Thank you. Wow.
I think we have time for a few questions.
John, I have a very simple question. This was fantastic, by the way. Do we have any, do you think, any other character like Partch that was so productive, so multifaceted, so incredibly...
Do we have anyone today that is like that?
Ever, have you ever had anybody like Partch in the history of Eastern music?
Not really. Not really. There is a guy in California right now who is sort of exploding like a volcano. His name is Brian Baumbush. Mark that name. He's built his own instruments. He's created an extraordinary world of music, and in his most recent release is also available in virtual reality. So there is a visual 3D component to that. So he's added that on top of it. So it's happening. It's happening. You know, somewhere on this planet.
I have a question. And I know his music, but not so deeply, but everything you played, I mean, one area that I find maybe, I don't want to use the term not as innovative, but there's no doubt that there's kind of a gamelan groove to almost everything. So with regard to the idea of putting the stratification of these sounds, they're always going to lock in because you always have that groove. Where I would think, I just wonder if there are examples where he does something more like the Stockhausen's Gruppen, which you have things moving at different tempi. I mean, really, and he can easily do that in the studio, I think.
He does. I have chosen examples because of the theme I was following, for things that ended up being very rhythmic.
Right.
His music is wildly divergent in terms of mood, style, so it's there.
And one follow-up, which I've wondered sometimes, and it's not a criticism, but an observation, I sometimes get the feeling that his innovations are more whimsical and fantastical, and he just sees what he can do and then he goes with it. As opposed to thinking about, I have a real idea in mind of something that I imagine in the back of my head, how am I going to realize that? Do you feel that he ever does the latter?
Some of his music, it makes you think, really? But there, I mean, if you've heard his operas, they are extraordinary. And it's exactly, he started from this point, I have a concept. His first opera was King Oedipus. He had the concept back in 1934. It took him 10 years to get to the point where he could really think about it. He made enough instruments, and he finally did it 20 years later. And it was a long gestation and very deeply considered.
Yeah, I guess if he's not just kind of let's see what happens kind of
Yeah.
attitude, right? He really does have end goals that are very specific.
Well, what we have sensed here is absolutely the tip of the iceberg, and it's a big freaking iceberg. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, John, I want to commend you for, showing things about Partch that maybe are even less known.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is again not a question so much, but I appreciate how you're affirming the innovation and the radicalness of Partch. I've been a little uncomfortable with how we're talking about Lou Harrison and Harry Partch and like primitive sometimes. And I know where that comes from, and I don't subscribe to that term.
They used to say the same about Ives, right? He's untutored.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, Taroskin describes Cajun as like the Cajun's music is neo-primitive. I kind of see where that comes from, but I also would say that that's sort of like a surface level assessment of what's going on, because there's as much ancient Greek neoclassicism in this as there is kind of exoticist
and blues
flavor
too. They
write both
highly trained
medieval music, Baroque music, ancient Greek musics, ancient Chinese music. Right. Yeah. So I think sometimes
where's the primitive bit, right?
Right. So I think it's easy sometimes to just kind of, and I'm not accusing anything or anyone, but this is like, no, this guy is doing things before Les Paul, before the Beatles, Like,
yeah.
You could program
Sgt. Pepper's 4 tracks. Right?
Yeah, you could do Tomorrow Never Knows, with pedal style. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, sir.
I've always been really curious to learn more about the relationship between Irv Wilson and Harry Partch. I know Wilson helped with some of the diagrams.
Yeah. They knew each other, they respected each other, they understood each other. Well, I'm not so sure Harry understood Irv or would have bothered, right?
I guess what I'm most interested in is like how much did Wilson inspire Partch's music, and if there's information on that.
I would say not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were friends, they were colleagues, but their worlds are very, very different. I mean, I'm sure if you sat Harry down, he'd probably say, too much here, not enough here, right?
Yeah.
Whole different story, but contemporaries, yeah. Shall we move on?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Put this back.
So again, her presentation, I don't think I mentioned the first time, Lou Harrison's Piano Concerto, Afamia, Al-Dayaa.
Thank you that I may be here and talk about the piano concerto. I'm well aware that some of you knew Harrison personally, so forgive me if I tell something that you already know. I'm just starting now. So the piano concerto was composed in 1984 at the request of Keith Jarrett. And Hugh Harrison wrote in the notes for the piano concerto that Keith accepted his request to tune the piano in a good well temperament rather than in the usual equal temperament. And in an in memoriam for Lou Harrison, we can read that microtonal experiments and experiments go back to his student days, and that, as with many other composers, Harry Partch's Genesis of Music had a significant influence on Harrison, and we heard a lot about it just now. Leading to a simplification of composition style and a hands-on involvement in the creation of new instruments, and to a commitment to non-standard tunings. And Harrison wrote about the Kirnberger No. 2 temperament, which is used in the piano concerto. The concerto then is an exploration of a number of the beauties of Kirnberger's No. 2 well temperament. This astonishing tuning contains almost the whole history of the last century, for its flat series produces perfectly tuned fourth and fifth, the whole Middle Ages, and the white keys are, with the exception of a very slightly raised pitch A, in perfect Renaissance and Baroque just intonation. The crossovers between the two series are of fascinating character, and the expressive powers of the forms in this tuning are, to me, very attractive. It therefore seemed inevitable to me to deal more with the Kirnberger well temperament. The basis for my discussion will mainly be literature overview. The discursivity of texts that deal with the topic temperament shows its complexity. For example, in response to a text by Herbert Kelletat, Helmut Karl-Heinz Lange wrote a critical examination of the clients that could be found in Herbert Kelletat's text, who in return responded to Helmut Lange's critical examination, which is this book. I can turn it, I can give it to you, so you can have a look on it. It's in German, but at the end there are tables of tunings that are maybe interesting to you too. And the article Bach style keyboard tuning discusses the essay Bach's extraordinary temperament, our Rosetta Stone 1 and 2. I will also refer to the text A Mathematical Approach Reconstituting Johann Sebastian Bach's Keyboard Temperament by Herbert Anton Kellner, Bach and the Art of Temperament by James Murray Barber. Further temperaments on Bach's 1722 temperament by Luigi Switch, and Key Temperament and Musical Expression by James O. Young for rather contextual remarks. As already said, a multitude of text shows that a lot of research has already been done. Consequently, it would not make sense to simply report on historical temperaments. My intention, therefore, is rather to discover more about the connection between historic temperaments, particularly the Kirnberger No. 2 temperament, and Lou Harrison and the Piano Concerto. So, in chapter 1 and 2, I try to elaborate a context for the Kirnberger temperaments. And in chapter 3, I will provide an overview of the Piano Concerto based on the original score and on statements from Harrison taken from various interviews. So I will give you the original score as well. So, Kirnberger was a music theorist, musician, and composer, and he is often mentioned in essays that deal with the so-called Bach temperament. In some texts, there is the statement that Kirnberger was a student of Johann Sebastian Bach. However, the seemingly also existing speculation that the Kirnberger temperament could have been identical to the so-called Bach temperament is rather rejected. And elsewhere, the question is even raised as to whether the so-called Bach temperament even existed. Indeed, it seems appropriate to refute at least some assumptions. In many of the texts discussed here, there is an explicit mention that well-tempered was often equated with equally tempered, but that this equation is wrong. In a mathematical approach to reconstituting Johann Sebastian Bach's keyboard temperament, we can read Das wohltemperierte Klavier was the title with which Johann Sebastian Bach gave to the first part of his collection of preludes and fugues through all keys, the fair copy being dated 1722. The meaning of this title has ever since remained enigmatic. Frequently well-tempered has been interpreted to mean equal temperament, but there is no justification for this and even less a proof. But as early as 1876, more than 100 years ago, Bosanquet realized that Bach's tuning was unequal. More recently, it was to the great credit of Herbert Kelletat, the book that's passing, that he stressed again that Bach's tuning could not have conformed to that of equal temperament. And James O. Young explains in his essay Key Temperament and Musical Expression, equal temperament was well known in the 17th and 18th centuries. It had its advocates and it was widely used for fretted instruments. Most musicians before the 19th century made, however, a conscious decision to shun equal temperament, and did so because this tuning deprived keys of their individual expressive powers. James O. Young claims in the same essay that Kirnberger rejected equal temperament for precisely this reason. And a passage confirming these statements can again be found in Herbert Anton Kellner's A Mathematical Approach to Reconstituting Johann Sebastian Bach's Keyboard Temperament. The usual objection that only equal temperament would admit all 24 tonalities. Or somehow it sometimes skips two, so I'm a bit sorry. Okay. The usual objection that only equal temperament would admit all 24 tonalities is wholly unfounded and wrong. In fact, various unequal systems do permit the usage of all keys without restrictions, and genuine characteristics of tonality come into play, whereas there can be obviously just one system of equal temperament, an infinite variety of unequal temperaments can be drawn up. With all that admittedly not insignificant room for speculation, what can be said with a certain incontrovertibility is that to these infinite unequal temperaments belongs the Kirnberger temperament as one of many existing temperaments at that time. Before I explicitly address the Kirnberger temperament, let's quickly recapitulate what all the many temperaments were actually about. In The Art of Temperament, we can read that explanations of the tuning of the musical scale are full of figures that a non-mathematician shies away from them in terror. I therefore stick to the approach now. If the figures cannot be avoided completely in a tuning, their number can be reduced to a small minimum, and that is what is attempted in this article. Some other authors also pointed out that the balance between music and mathematics should rather be in favor for music. In Bradley Lehman's text, we can even read that Bach was no lover of dry mathematical stuff. And Marlinke states in Johann Sebastian Bach's tunings, Bach never endorsed any mathematical tuning scheme, and there is a fair amount of circumstantial evidence that he had none in mind, but rather tuned according to pragmatic criteria with leeway to accommodate such exigencies as the tempo of the instrument at hand. There is also the repeated statement that listening is essential, and without listening, the numbers remain a bit abstract, but we will get an impression of at least the Kirnberger number 2 temperament in the second part of this presentation. Despite the skepticism, some mathematical explanations help understand the problem. There are different approaches to clarifying it. I find it most clearly explained in Herbert Anton Penner's essay in the chapter Pure Intervals and Their Incommensurability. By means of the monochord, it is found that the simple geometrical ratios of string length, a half, 2/3, 3/4, and so on, correspond successively to the musical intervals octave, fifth, fourth, and so on. In general, these pure intervals cannot be composed from each other. 12/5 will not yield exactly 7 octaves. The ratio thus occurring is called the Pythagorean or diatonic comma. In regard to the relations between the other intervals, one finds that the major third, 5/4, is too small for 3 of its kind to constitute a perfect octave, and that 4 minor thirds exceeds the octave, and the minor third is thus too large as measured by the octave. Turning now to the relation between third and fifth, the second octave below 4 perfect fifths is seen to render a major third slightly larger than the pure interval. Their ratio is called a syntonic comma. We can distinguish between the Pythagorean or diatonic tuning that links together the notes of the scale by a succession of pure fifths, and the syntonic tuning or just intonation with the attempt to keep the thirds pure, and as a substitute to correct the 40 triads of just intonation, the mean tone tuning or mean tone temperament. Barber writes, if mean tone tuning is an adaptation of just intonation, equal temperament similarly has often been considered a more useful version of Pythagorean tuning. To put it somewhat simply, historic temperaments can be understood as attempts to distribute the commas so that no particular dissonant or unusable intervals arise. Lange describes in his article several temperaments. In addition to the Pythagorean tuning, the just intonation, the mean tone tuning, and the Kirnberger temperament, he also describes the Silbermann tuning, the Werkmeister tuning, the Kelletat tuning, Schlick-Barber, the Arnold Schlick, the Grammateus tuning, the Ganassi tuning, and the Thomas Young tuning, and provides a comparative table of these tunings. In the tables, cents are used as a comparative unit based on the succession of fifths. The table shows the deviations from the perfect fifth with a 701.955 cents. Lange mentions that the 18th century was blessed with attempts on temperature. Fights were often only about little matter. He comes to the conclusion, in a final resume, we can say that the 18th century, with the exception of Kirnberger's ingenious third version, which represents, so to speak, the high point of the mean tone temperature, was no longer capable of any improvement. That was because the art of the masters of the 16th century was already almost perfect. Neither Silbermann, who copied Schlick, nor Wiesel, whose temperature appears to be a plagiarism of that of Grammateus, nor Malcolm with this variant of the Ganassi model, were able to contribute anything independent and progressive to the complex of questions discussed. The time was ready for the unavoidable triumph of equal temperament with which the magic of the peculiar song character of the old tunings was unfortunately lost for centuries, the revival of which should be a worthwhile and grateful task, and at the same time an obligation for our generation. Lange considered Kirnberger's third temperament to be the better version. He even admits the thought to use Kirnberger's third temperature version to represent the music of the 18th century is very tempting. At the same time, he refuses to propagate even the third Kirnberger temperament as Bach tuning, and also questions Kelletal's view of understanding the second Kirnberger temperature as theoretical reflection of Bach's tempering. We know that there are three Kirnberger temperaments, and of course they are not three completely different tunings, but developments of the previous versions. The first version appeared in Kirnberger's Klavierübung in 1766, but this tuning was met with strong rejection because of a strong holding wolf. Therefore, Kirnberger suggested in Die Kunst des reinen Satzes in 1771 to distribute the syntonic comma between the 2/5 D, A, E. In this temperament, you can see it here marked in green. In this temperament, there are then 9 pure fifths and a pure third D, F sharp, which means that the fifth, F sharp, C sharp is too narrow by exactly 1 schism, which is almost identical to 1/12 of the Pythagorean comma. The A is tuned to D and E, so that the 2/5 become equal close by half the syntonic comma. Kirnberger's third temperament appeared in the letter to Forkel in 1779 and is described like that. Just like in mean tone temperature, the third CE is tuned pure and the 4/5 between C, G, D, A, E are regularly tempered. Again, you can see it in green. So that each fifth is a quarter of the syntonic comma too narrow. The remaining fifths are pure except for the fifth F sharp, C sharp, which by itself becomes too narrow by a schism. Kirnberger himself supposedly considered the second temperature version to be the best. The easy tunability of the Kirnberger number 2 temperament is repeatedly and positively mentioned. Also in Harrison's instruction for tuning the piano in the Kirnberger number 2 temperament, the tuning procedure seems surprisingly simple. What is interesting about this instruction is that there are no cents or whatsoever, just the mention to tune equally dissonant to the ear. Regarding the other instruments of the selected orchestra, Harp 1 should tune to the white keys of the piano and Harp 2 to C, D flat, F, G, A flat, and B flat to the piano. And strings should avoid tuning to the piano's A, but rather tune to the piano's G and D, and also should avoid playing open A and E strings, which seems plausible since the intervals D, A, E are the dissonant ones in the Kirnberger number 2 temperament. And further instructions on playing techniques, such as that the trombones should try for maximum legato, can also be found in the notes. The full selected orchestra consists of 2 strings, 2 harps, 3 trombones, and 4 percussionists. Due to this rather unusual instrumentation, the piano concerto has an almost chamber music character in terms of instrumentation, but not in terms of sound. The piano concerto has 4 movements: Allegro, Stampedi Allegro, Largo, Allegro Moderato. Harrison writes, the first movement is a normal concerto form, including the 2 subjects and the tonal collection into the original key in the recapitulation. What I find striking about the first movement is the very clear distribution of an almost continuous accompaniment under a sweeping long-winded melodic line. The piano usually combines both elements. The resolute octaves of the introduction, which are taken up again in the recapitulation, build an impressive opening and a contrast to the constantly floating music. Voice doubling in unison in octaves to strengthen melodic lines are used almost permanently, not only in the first movement, but throughout the entire piano concerto. Perhaps this can be explained with the following statement by Harrison, which seems to point to a special quality of the octaves in the Kirnberger No. 2 temperament, saying, "My octaves are flat out, 2-to-1s up and down." Okay, maybe that's already it. Yeah, I just took out short examples. Right. Special about the second movement are the clusters. One can assume that inspiration for this cluster techniques also came from his teacher, Henry Cowell. Basically, there are 3 ranges of clusters. Here at the very end of the second movement, they are in double octaves. At the very beginning, we find clusters in fifth, and there are also passages with clusters that cover exactly an octave, and I think the clusters are also played with a special tool. This movement places a strong focus on rhythmic elements. Therefore, the percussion instruments play an important role with their rhythmical patterns. Harrison writes, "The second movement, Stampede, is a large and rambunctious expansion of the European area's medieval dance form Estampede. The 2 words are cognate and refer to general noise and brouhaha, and not, as I had originally thought, to any form of stamping dance." Largo movement, with its quiet and introspective character and its melodic lines, forms a clear contrast to the strongly percussive second movement. It begins with a long piano solo. Harrison writes, "The third movement explores the rich consonances of the tuning, along with chromatic contrasts. Indeed, there are passages with some more chromatic movement than in the other movements." Then the fourth movement is the shortest movement of the piano concerto. And Harrison writes, in that final movement I have written jalas in a sort of perpetuum mobile style, which includes what I believe to be the first stretches of canonic jalas too. This last movement is meant as a kind of lacework and moves gently between two related modes. We have heard jalas yesterday in the concert. Yeah, so now this is the last example to listen. In summary, there are a lot of things coming together in this piano concerto with a generally melodic and harmonic catchiness mixed with some non-Western sound nuances. It connects a medieval European dance form with seemingly non-Western elements within a concerto form that is again very classic and European. Due to that, I am tempted to say that the term eclectic would somewhat be accurate, although Harrison himself generally denied eclecticism in an interview on the grounds that, in his opinion, eclecticism would only refer to using different styles in one single movement. As a summary, it can be said that Hugh Harrison was particularly in favor of the historic Kirnberger No. 2 temperament and seems to have found that the equal temperaments are particularly displeasurable. He stated, "I like to remind people that the piano has to be tuned, and you can tune it in a great number of ways. In most equal temperament tunings of the piano, the octaves are stretched in the upper register as much as a minor third in some instances. I don't allow that. I keep my piano in the Kirnberger No. 2, which is my favorite temperament for keyboards." I dropped my original intention to also writing about the connection between Harrison and Schoenberg, although Schoenberg is next to Cowell mentioned as one of Harrison's principal teachers by Hugh Harrison himself. But regarding to this topic, it is perhaps interesting that on the homepage of the Schoenberg Center in Vienna there is a homage to Schoenberg written by Harrison in which he states about Schoenberg's piano concerto opus 42, and here I found similarities to his own piano concerto. Schoenberg's use of the orchestra is like no other composers, saving perhaps Bach's. The instruments are treated almost always as in chamber music. And though the score contains much of dubbing and strengthening of individual lines, the general effect is still one of differentiation among the sounds. The use of the piano throughout is in the best of taste, never relaxing to arpeggiated accompaniments. So I have come to the end. Yeah, sorry.
Very, very nice. Very interesting. Did anyone make it to the Schoenberg Piano Concerto that was performed at Juilliard just a few days ago? It's interesting, I think, the world we live in where I barely knew about it until the day of, and I teach you through that. But it's interesting. Thank you for mentioning that. Anyway, thank you very much.
Other comments that you might find interesting. The Steinway Company is very, very careful about tunings. They will allow no messing around with tuning. It's got to be standard A440, except if somebody's playing blues concerto. Steinway will allow them to teach Kernberger too, which is pretty wild. Now, it was, you know, it was Keith Jarrett that played, right? I had an opportunity to interview him. It turns out that concert that they recorded live, like all concerts, he was brought on for an encore afterwards and played the instrument, right? It was him that way. And I said, so Keith, you must have been fascinated by Kernberger too. Were you interested in continuing that? And he went, no way.
Okay. So he isn't equally tempered.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
There is a recording of it somewhere. I think Johnny Reinhardt told me he has it on one of his many, many tapes, so it can be found. But there's a little tidbit for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That's a good question. So that wasn't Kernberger's tuning.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have to be honest, and pardon the pun, but I think a lot of people in this room might be more in tune to hearing things in different tunings. And I wonder, because I didn't really hear it, and I wonder if it's because a lot of the music was pentatonic or diatonic. And I'm wondering if when you write in different tunings in pentatonic, it tends to embrace the tunings more. Whereas if this was a highly chromatic piece, I think I would hear it more. Yeah. Which would say a lot about tunings of the Baroque period, because most of that music was not highly chromatic. And when it was highly chromatic, it was meant to sound like Frescobaldi on Brack, right? Yeah. So it's just interesting. I got to be honest, if I heard that recording, I wouldn't say what tuning was that. Yeah. Maybe it's a recording and live I would hear it, but I didn't get it. Yeah. It's interesting. It's also interesting to note when you say eclecticism about that. This piece was written the same year as the Ligeti Piano Concerto. And both of those defied labeling, because people wanted to call the Ligeti postmodern, and it kind of was, but not in the postmodern way. And I would put this in the same category. It's really interesting how to think about it as being written in the 1980s.
Yeah, it's maybe not necessary to label it anyway, but yeah. I have some interesting, for the first, you said, like, I prepared some questions just in case nobody has questions. One question was, how does the Kirchner second temperament sound to you? Does it sound much different from equal temperament? And because Harrison himself, he stated in an interview on occasion, I've had to point out to people that I was using a different tuning system because it sounded so natural and normal to them. I think, if we would have listened to the third movement, where there is more chromatic movement, a bit longer, maybe we would have heard it more.
One thing you might find really interesting, there's a pianist in New York called Evan Shinners, and he's kind of like a modern-day Glenn Gould. He goes by the name W.T.F. Bach.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, I know him well. He's a friend of mine. He one time, I remember we were in Alice's Teacup, which was kind of a little tea place up in the Upper West Side, and he showed me that in many of Bach's signatures where he does this kind of curly Q things, that those are actually tuned.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
I saw that too, yeah. I was like asking myself, like, how is this working?
That's correctly playing on.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's called the squiggle squabble. They've been fighting about it.
Yeah, it's kind of still like unsettled, as it were.
Yeah, thank you for digging into this piece, which I think is a good entry point and full of aspects of blues music. Right, you hear all the elements that he combines. I think, as you said, not eclectically, but with purpose. About the tuning, I think it's important to remember that I think Lou was after, for better or for worse, purity. Yeah. When he worked with certain intervals, he despised equal tempered thirds in particular. And so Kernberger is a tuning that allows you to have pure triads in some keys. And of course, for the middle movement, you get those pure Cs. And I think it's like, can you hear that? It's like, you can hear it. Do you want to hear it? Because once you hear it, every time you hear a tempered third, you'll be like, oh shit, this sucks. Right? That's how we would put it. Like that. Once you find out what you were losing by tempering, then it's hard to unhear it.
Yeah, I was wondering about interested in it, especially in connection with the piano, because like, you know, on the guitar you can tune it by yourself, but the effort to retune a piano on stage, like where you play usually repertoire with equal temperament, is like very special. And as you mentioned, like the Steinway company obviously supports that. And yeah, but also like I was interested because especially for the piano, like we have this fixed tuning and that's it, and we play on it and we don't question or change it.
But you have to remember that in Kerberger too, there's some really bad fifths.
Mm-hmm.
And he played those and he used them, and I called him on it, and he said, I just call those gutsy fifths. Because it's an interval, and if you heard in that crazy canon last night that he wrote for guitar, there's some really out of tune fifths on there. And he said, I did that on purpose. So, you know, it wasn't all purity. But which is interesting.
Yeah, some costs on some involves always like, but maybe the pentatonic is also working because the fifths are so pure. I don't know.
I think that's well, yeah. But I have to say, you know, I have a weird bias, and I don't think I'm alone, that you can do different tunings on any instrument. Think about keyboard, like mean tone temperament, beautiful, really works. But the piano, and I don't know because I really think the piano is so couched in the 19th century that anything other than equal to me tends to just sound out of tune. I hear that weird twang and I hear beauty in other instruments when they play microtones. But the piano, just like octaves too. When you hear octaves on the piano, they're like nothing else with regard to having a linkage to the 19th century. Schoenberg was aware of that. And later composers like Les didn't want to do octaves because of that incredible association with music of the past. He wouldn't have such a problem with octaves in other instruments, double, for example.
Yeah, no, there is even you may not do octaves and like in Schoenberg music right on this side.
I've read Chopin was probably playing in well temperament, it's not an equal temperament tune.
Right.
I haven't done any research, but then that's definitely possible.
Yeah. Any questions? Thank you so much. Through microtonality and electronic specialization, Mr. Elkin has performed on some of the most prestigious stages of the world, including Carnegie Hall, Avery Fisher Hall, Jazz Center at Lincoln Center, and the Kimmel Center for the Arts. He has presented lecture performances at the Mozart Case University of Salzburg, the University of London, and the Contemporary Art Center of Seoul, South Korea. He has premiered new work for trombone in chamber settings with New York composers, Circle, Nemesis Ensemble, Contemporaneous, Ensemble Musen, and the New York Trombone Concert with David Taylor. He has premiered solo work for trombone by Herbert Howe, Jerry John Mizell, and many others. You can see in the bio here. Mr. Elkin has been written about in many publications, including Broadway World, Opera Wire, New Music USA, I Care If You Listen, Classical Music Daily, and Avant Music News. His music is available on WAW and Blaze Records and has been played on WKCR New York Radio. Jacob Elkin regularly performs on tenor trombone, brass, bass trombone, euphonium, and tuba. He is, low brass, right, specialist. He is on faculty at brass instructor at the United Nations International School. I give you Jacob Elkin, lecture recital, Technical Considerations for Lou Harrison's At the Tomb of Charles Ives.
When I had originally planned to give this recital, I did intend on doing more playing than I'm probably going to do today for reasons that I'll get into. So I will be talking a lot, but I did bring my alto trombone, which is what Lou Harrison wrote for a couple of his pieces, including this one that I'm going to get into. Anyway, part of the reason that I'm going to be playing less than I'd hoped is because I wasn't able to actually get this instrument until 2 weeks ago. It's really hard to get a hold of, and some of the reasons that I'll talk about.
No sackbut, huh?
Yes. As you mentioned, this piece, Lou Harrison actually asked for an alto sackbut, which is an extremely rare instrument that I was only able to get a hold of to do some recording on, just to try it. But he does give the option for the alto trombone, because I assume even at the time it was kind of hard to get a hold of. So at the beginning of the score for this piece, he has this long introduction, which mostly talks about the instrumentation, which is very strange. So he says, this composition in freestyle is scored in part specifically and in part generically. Already kind of vague here. The harps may be Irish or Western concert kinds. The bowed strings are here to be of the violin family. For the soft and somber quality they have over the viols or other kinds. And the 8 musicians will, of course, have to undertake serious studies, which we'll get into shortly. Yes. By trombone, I mean either the alto trombone or the alto sackbut. Either, preferably with a mouthpiece of French horn shape. Very specific. The part should be played mostly on natural harmonics. The slide should be evident and slowish. We'll talk about those things more soon. Psaltery should be either metal strung and either Chinese chengs or the present American auto harp kind. They should be played with guitar picks or long fingernails. These parts may also be played close to the bridge and again with guitar picks or fingernails on single strings of piano. If so, use felt to damp up to 2 of the strings of the 3. Yeah. Harpsichord may play these parts if the actions are fast ones and the tones are a loud sound. The dulcimers, too, may be like the auto harps. The single string may play with springy wire hammers, metal on metal, or both parts may be played together on another piano. Single strings with thumbtacks in the hammers. Tam-tam must be large and deep. The psalteries, dulcimers, and harps must be tuned in advance. To the schema that I'll show you shortly. So you can see he says it's scored specifically and generally, and you definitely get a lot of specifics and a lot of like, if you can't do this kind of things in here, which I think are really interesting. And I was only able to find 2 recordings online. I'm sure there are more somewhere, but you can already imagine why just by looking at this. So my part of this was first finding an alto sackbut. And when I found this piece, I knew about an alto sackbut that Queens College Aaron Copeland School of Music has, which is where I got my master's degree. So I heard that they had one, but it was really difficult to get access to, especially over the summer. But I finally was able to, and I got some nice pictures of it. This is a Meinl and Lauber alto sackbut from 1971. I'm probably horribly mispronouncing that. It's German. And it does have a 12 millimeter bore mouthpiece, which is the size that a French horn would use. So I assume that's what Lou Harrison was talking about when he says of a French horn kind. It's a little unclear because like a trombone mouthpiece, I don't know how well you can see from there, compared to a French horn mouthpiece is generally like much more conical in shape. And this mouthpiece, you can see in the photo, looks more like what I have here, which is a larger, sorry, I don't know the technical term, but kind of a less steep slope to the curve as it's going down. So I'm not sure if he was working with a trombonist who specifically had a mouthpiece that was more similar, or if he was referring to bore size. But based on what I saw with the alto sackbut when I did try it, maybe he was just referring to bore size. So what I'm using now for an alto trombone is 13 millimeters, which is pretty standard nowadays. A lot of alto trombones are being used for, Dvorak or Brahms, so they need a little bit more projection. So the bore size is larger now than it probably would have been when he wrote the piece. So that's something too. So some of the instructions that he talks about for the solo trombone part are interesting because they're kind of vague and don't make a lot of sense, at least for me as a trombonist. So first, the part should be played mostly on natural harmonics, he says. So this is confusing, and I get this a lot from composers when I play new pieces, is almost everything we play on trombone is a harmonic, actually. So it doesn't really tell me anything to say that at all. This will be kind of like a warm-up for me. So we have 7 basic slide positions where we can play the fundamental, which we call our pedal notes. those low notes are really the only notes that aren't harmonics per se. Those are like the fundamental tones of each slide position. I mean, theoretically, we can do microtonal throughout, so there's technically an infinite number of those, but we very rarely play those, especially on an alto trombone. We're mostly playing higher notes. And then using our embouchure, we go through the harmonic series. So. I should warm up a little bit. So we can hear like going up to the eighth harmonic that way in fourth position. Yeah. So the other reason this is kind of confusing is the part as it's written doesn't really match up with any of those natural harmonics in any of our standard slide positions. So if he was referring to, like, if he wanted a seventh harmonic, for example, that doesn't match up with any of the pitches there. With the exception of one, which is the high E on the ninth partial that he writes, which would be 2 cents sharp, but actually when we play it on pretty much any trombone, we actually have to adjust that out. That partial is naturally sharp. So the ninth partial is more sharp than it should be. So you might expect, based on the harmonic series, that it would be like 2 cents. Or sorry, 4 cents. But it's actually more like 12 to 16. So if I'm playing, in this case, like a high E in second position would normally be halfway to the bell, but I usually have to play it here, or it's going to be horribly out of tune. So 4 cents above that is good. I don't know, that, like, not even noticeably. So yeah, so that information is, again, just like not helpful in any way. And I kind of wonder what he was really talking about. But, and the other information he uses, the slide should be evident and slowish. I honestly don't really know what he means by evident as far as our slide motion, other than maybe accurate. I suppose he might mean by that. And slowish, I have to assume he's referring to the glissandos. So there's a... So there's that glissando and another layer. So I assume he wants those rhythmically to be slow glissandos in this piece, based on that. So like I said, there's 2 recordings that I was able to find online. One of them is performed by Chris Washburn, who teaches up at Columbia. Unfortunately, I've not been able to get a hold of him to ask him more about this piece. I talked to Johnny, but he couldn't remember like what equipment he was using. But listening to it, I wonder if he's playing on a tenor sackbut, because he plays the entire part down an octave. So we can listen to this a little bit. First an ad for Grammarly. And this is conducted by Johnny Reinhardt as well. Yeah, so just a couple of things about that recording.
I have the whole universe at my fingertips.
Sorry. Just a couple of things about that recording. I talked to Johnny a little bit, and it was a while back that they recorded that, but one of the things that he mentioned were the harps were Peruvian harps, which don't seem to project quite as well. And I don't know Chris Washburn personally, but I know he's a very fine trombonist, and I can tell he had trouble with some of the partials, and that's why I wonder if he was playing on a tenor sackbut. How do I say this? Sackbut is an atrocious instrument to play. It's very difficult to navigate the partials. It also, if I go back to the pictures, the bell doesn't flare out the same way that modern trombones do, so it doesn't project in the same way. People say that when you're playing the sackbut, it's like you're playing the musical space that you're in. And I wonder if that was something that Lou Harrison was looking for specifically in his sound. But it also makes it difficult to play, and that might be part of why he, played it down the octave as well. The other recording that I've been able to find was done by the Slee Sinfonietta at the University of Buffalo Charles Ives Festival, and this one was done on alto trombone. I wasn't able to find who performed it, and they don't have the full performance online either. It's a very challenging part, and I kind of wonder if this one was done by a trumpet player. But we can listen to the first part of it.
From cozy breakfast nooks to formal dining areas, Ashley has versatile dining options starting at
and in this recording, they do use traditional Western harps, so you can hear them a lot more clearly, which to me is kind of nice. But I do appreciate the kind of what's the word I'm saying? The rustic quality that Johnny's recording has to that. Sorry. But these are the only two recordings that I've been able to find online. I know there have been other performances, but collecting the instruments and then doing the tuning system, which I'm going to go through next, I think is a big part of why this hasn't been performed very often. And my analysis of the score and the MIDI that I was able to create from it, I hope will maybe give it some more opportunities to be done. Now we got it. So you can hear now we're in the octave that it's actually written in, which seems to make a little bit more sense with the orchestration of this, but it is very challenging to play it in that upper octave. I don't know why. Maybe they had some issue with the recording or something after that, so they don't post the whole thing. But yeah, those are the two recordings that I've been able to find. So let's go through the tuning. Actually, no. Hang on. This is my recording that I did at Queens College, and I'll just say there are two things that I wish I could do better on this. First of all, I only had like 2 hours that I could practice on this instrument and record on it, so my intonation I'm a little bit sharp on a lot of notes, and also I kind of rushed through the thing. So another thing that makes this a challenging piece is it's marked quarter note equals 44, and all the recordings seem to go a little bit faster than that because it's just challenging to hold those notes. So I do rush through a few sections in here, but you can hear it on alto sax putt. So as far as I know, this is the only recording on alto sax putt, but of course without the other. So first I played it in the octave that Chris Washburn played it down the octave, and then the other octave. No, why isn't that playing? Hang on. I'm gonna hit my sound bar. I did only play the opening section though. Okay, now where it's written. Like I said, a very challenging instrument to play. Thank you. And it's so tiny and adorable looking, right? But you can hear it doesn't really project that much. I was in like a classroom, so I had a decent amount of reverb. Probably would work better in a concert hall, which may have been what you were saying. So the tuning scheme that he gives at the bottom of the first page is this. So it's all in ratios, which I went through them all and calculated them out to the 10th of a cent. Some of the calculations are probably a tiny bit because of that, but what's a 10th of a cent between friends? Anyway, so Psaltery 1 and Psaltery 2, you can see here, the dulcimers and harp 1 give you like the pitches that you hear for the first section and the last section of the piece, and then there's the freestyle in the middle, the short section where they cut off in the Buffalo recording. They uses the harp 2 and harp 3, which has some other pitches which are kind of interesting, and then some interesting pitches in the strings that I'll get into as well. I think it's easier to just skip things. So this is from my score, which is just a transcription of the score, but giving cent derivations, so it's a lot easier to play rather than knowing all these things. And we're based on like A440 as our baseline, plus or minus 0 cents. And then the trombone part, kind of like in the piano concerto, it doesn't necessarily sound microtonal at all at the beginning because we're just in some really common just intonation ratios in a just minor third from A. So we're in like a C plus 15.6 kind of just intonation area where we've got perfect fourth or perfect fifth G, and then D and E are the just ratios that you would expect. So as the trombonist, once you hear the strings come in and you're listening to the harp, theoretically it's actually not that hard to play. Although I do find it really interesting that he didn't bother to write anything other than the ratios to help the trombonist out. And same with the strings too. You're just expected to like, oh yeah, listen, I figured it out. When I was looking at the score for the piano concerto too, there's just nothing. There's nothing written. It's just like, listen, which is, I mean, it's doable, but as a player, I would like to know what's going on a little bit more. So that's why I made this. Another thing that I put, oh, you can't see my cursor, but like the first note, the G, in the trombone world, we would write the slide position for that is like -4. So somewhere around there, 4th position would probably be closer to here, so I need to go like about 12th tone, which is a 6th of a position, so around here. We commonly play D in 4th position on the tenor trombone in what we call +4, which is about the same distance out. So I know it's a little counterintuitive. We're going -4, but it's actually sharper, but that's because we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Does that make sense? It makes a lot of sense for trombonists, so that's why I put it there. Because you could also play that G in 1st position, but there would be no way to raise it 17.6 cents unless you push the tuning slide in, which would also be a possibility when you're playing this. You could just push this in and make the whole thing just like 15 or 17.6 cents sharp. But personally, I wouldn't. Yeah. Good. I don't think there was anything else I was going to say about this page. But I also put all the other pitches just so you can see them for reference, like kind of as a study score. Yeah. So just quickly, because I don't know how interested people will be in this, but pitch bends in Sibelius, because now everybody's using Dorico, right? Which has all kinds of like great microtonal systems in it. But Sibelius doesn't. But they do have quarter tone pitch bends built in, and that's how I was able to get accurate MIDI for this by like calculating the way they get 24 Ito. So they put a symbol that B0, 64 puts you in 12 Ito for all of your MIDI in Sibelius. And then if you put it in 24 Ito, you get 80. So from some quick calculations, you can figure out that each cent is 0.32 based on the number after the B0. So with that, you can get whatever kind of pitch bends you want. Limitations are, though, the grace notes you can't really do without like putting them in a separate part. So in my MIDI performance, the grace notes and the psaltery parts are not actually accurate, but they go by so quickly, I figured it's not the end of the world. And it's also not possible to do multiple different bends on the same part. So in my study score, I have multiple hard parts just because there's one section where you need to adjust 2 pitches in different amounts. And also the glissandos sound really weird just generally, so I left them out of the MIDI. Anyway, so I'm going to quickly play the MIDI playback that I use. And the idea for this is that you can use it to practice this piece at home if you were the soloist, which otherwise I think you'd have a really hard time short of like making your own drone. Because like I said, when the strings come in with their C 15.6 sharp and their perfect fifth, it's actually pretty easy to play in tune with that, but hard to do on your own. And even in the recordings, like, I feel really bad saying this, because again, Chris Washburn is like such an amazing player, and I have a feeling he was playing on an instrument that was not doing him any favors, but I can hear that like his D is a little bit flat, so, you know, maybe something like this would have been helpful. Kind of suspicious that in some of the recordings the psalteries like get out of tune over time. I know I've had that problem when I've like retuned guitars, where I have to retune them often to make sure that they stay in the right place. wanted to get through that part because the freestyle section I think is really interesting, and it's another part of Johnny's recording. I hate saying this because it's such a great recording, but I feel like some of the pitches may not be like perfectly accurate, which is understandable given what's written and what's expected of this part. But when you listen to the MIDI, there's some parts that I wonder if, in the future it could be tuned a little bit more accurately. So in this section, the intonation for the pitches starts to become more free, as you would expect. And I guess someone in here is going to be talking more about this, right, in the future. So they can probably tell you more about it than I can. But it was really interesting for me. Earlier in the piece, when we have D's notated, they're always 19.6 cents sharp, and in this section they're -2, and then there's also as we go into the next section, like this transitionary period in here, right in here, where we go into like all these other pitches that are not in the sultry parts, not in the harp parts, not anywhere, that are really interesting, but then lead us back to our D plus 19.5 here, which brings us back to like the A section of the piece, which I find like really interesting, just because I would love to know what Lou Harrison was thinking mathematically to like go to this different place and then end up back where it was. So when you look at the part for the violins here, we just have ratios connecting to each one, which I find very difficult to calculate if I were playing it like in real time. But calculated out, we get C sharp minus 62.5, things like that. Personally, it'd be nice to know that have that written in my part if I had to play that to figure it out. And then, like I said, like at the beginning of the line here, we're at a D minus 2, and by the end, through all these ratios added together through this kind of scale, we end up back at our plus 19.5, which leads back to the A section of the piece. So obviously really well planned out by Lou Harrison, but not immediately evident if you're playing the piece or looking at the piece. Anyway, so my whole idea for this is just to make the piece more approachable and maybe get more performances, more recordings, more accurate recordings. I played a lot of microtonal pieces by now in various systems, and whatever people give me, I just end up writing cents above to help myself. Because everything we play on trombone is by ear. I mean, it's so controlled here. For example, I can do almost an octave just with my lips. And this is the same thing with my slide. If I'm, making an adjustment of, let's say, a 12th tone that is a 6th of a slide position. On alto trombone, of course, the slide positions are all closer together. So just so it's easy to see, like 3rd position to 4th position would be here to here. Usually about matching the bell to the bar here for 3rd, and then depends on the trombone, but roughly here for 4th position. So if I need to divide that into 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that. So you can see it's very easy to be off by a little bit. So personally, I have the most success if I can listen to something while I'm playing it. Obviously, Lou Harrison was thinking about that. He perfectly set up the strings, set up the harp to really help the trombonist. Not so much for the violins in the freestyle section, though. So having these things to help them and to help the trombonist, I think is something that might make it a piece that gets performed more often. The instrumentation, I think, is still like a major problem for this piece. I mean, he did give a lot of options, and he says there's a specific and a generic way of doing this. So, I think like Johnny Reinhardt had the right idea with being a little bit free in interpretation of what instruments you use with that. But I do think it sounds better in the upper octave. Like I said, I wasn't able to get this instrument until 2 weeks ago, so I'm still not super confident playing in the upper octave. or I would do that for you today. But yeah, it's doing it on alto sac bud is in some ways actually easier because the mouthpiece is smaller, the bore size is smaller, but also harder because it's a trickier instrument. So just one more thing on that, just because it might be interesting to people. The alto sac bud's bell, instead of stopping here and flaring, goes more around to here. So then, like I was saying, third position is here on the alto trombone. Well, it's still here on the alto sac, but except the bell is out here, so you don't have a visual to do it. So there's also difficulties with that. And again, that's where like being able to hear it, I just think is so important. And if you had to wait till the dress rehearsal to do that, scary, right? Yeah, great. So that's the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, right.
This piece was recorded by Lucas Voss and the Brooklyn Philharmonic.
Oh, nice.
And I'd love
to hear it.
I've got a copy on my laptop.
Awesome.
Maybe we can trade.
Yeah, that would be amazing, because I am so curious about this piece. I mean, one of the reasons I started looking at this piece is because I just looked at what he wrote for trombone, and there weren't so many options. There's the symphony and freestyle. I didn't realize the piano concerto had trombone parts, actually. So maybe there's more than I realized. But since this is like a trombone solo, it was something that I wanted to explore.
Well, the strict songs feature two trombones pretty prominently.
Oh yeah, I got to do more research.
And they play in the 7th harmonic.
Okay.
And that may be what he was referring to.
Yeah, I don't see how though. In this piece, there's this really, like I said, there's only one note where it would actually match up on a regular slide positions harmonic. I mean, like I said, everything we play are harmonics, so if you put the slide somewhere, it'll work that way. But I can't even imagine how. Yeah. It's really hard for me to understand exactly.
Isn't that what he means though? Like, isn't he just clarifying that he wants everything to be harmonically tuned? So to just, instead of finding those pitches elsewhere?
I mean, that would make the glissandos impossible for one thing. And for another, like, I'd have to wrap my head around that. Because you would be doing like very weird, very strange slide positions if that were the case. It's possible, like I said, like it's a little unclear exactly what he meant by that, but he may have had a specific idea in mind. I don't know.
Well, those first three notes are just harmonics 3, 4, 5. So
yeah, but on an alto trombone, they don't line up with where the partials are on the trombone. Does that make sense?
Does it line up if it's an octave higher than that, though? It's also, you get even more of the phrase if you start on a 6 and go 6, 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah, that's the thing. I have to think about that a lot to see if that's actually possible. Because where it's pitched in E flat, G, where could I play that G that it would work? There's theoretically maybe a way that works, but it would maybe be like out in 7th, and it would be so out of tune because it's in 7th.
But I think probably what he wants is can't you adjust the position so that the hypothetical fundamental is in tune to where you want to be, and then you get all the harmonics above it? I don't play the trombone, so.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a way that it makes. It's really hard for me to explain. Like,
so basically, the C
way.
plus 14, that's your position, and then you play the harmonics above it for that phrase. Again, not even part-time trombone.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of notes in my head. It might be possible if you did it like all in 4 and adjusted things here, and then the glissando though.
Well,
The glissando you have to move regardless.
Yeah. But
And
that
then
piece wouldn't be there for the harmonic series anyway.
Yeah.
And so that's where I want the glissando to be like, don't hide it. It's just you're bending it basically.
I have to think about that more. Yeah, I guess you could do it all in fourth if you do it where it's written, and you would still have to make adjustments though, because like that's my other thing that made it confusing. Is like if you did it all in fourth, it wouldn't all be in fourth because of the instrument. So when you go to the different partials, they have like naturally out of tune. But it could be that that's what he wanted.
That's what he wants.
Is he wanted like you to do like instead of
And sorry,
But-
just freewheeling here, but would the sackbut be easier in that way? Is it more attuned to fragments of the harmonic series because it's a simpler tubing?
No, it would just be harder in every way.
Okay.
I do think it could be possible that way, and it could be that that's what he wanted.
Sort of like a natural horn, you know? It's like,
Yeah. I can hear in the recordings that they're not doing it that way. Maybe the recording I haven't heard, maybe he does it that way. But I can hear that they're moving the slide. But yeah, that could be. That could be. And that's like another interesting thing that's like come up from pieces I've played by composers where they want things like that, and it just makes the piece harder to play without sounding any different, or very small difference. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe that is what he wanted. Maybe he had a reason that I don't know that he wanted it specifically that way.
I think he did want the plucked psalteries, and for example, he was not thinking of psaltery as one of those bow psalteries, but as the Chinese chung.
Yeah.
And it's an uncharacteristically, I think, programmatic piece from him. It's obviously a comment on the unanswered question of Ives.
Right. Yeah.
And where there's this proud voice of the trombone that keeps coming back, even though the psalteries are kind of going down into the tune.
Yeah.
And the freestyle is also like a homage to Ives, because it's because Ives was the person who did uncompromising, outlandish things for the orchestra.
Yeah.
Didn't care if they weren't all that practical.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the first time I read the instructions, and he's asking for like a specific kind of mouthpiece and things like that. I was like, what could he possibly have like? I'm so curious, like who he was working with, and what exactly kind of equipment they had that led him to request these things.
I wonder if that would help.
Well, like I said, the bore size, I definitely do find it to be easier to play on a smaller bore.
Yeah, but I wonder if because you said the horn one is the one with the steeper one.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to only play harmonics, I wonder if that is meant as
It could be. I think it would more help with the range than anything else. Yeah, having like a sharper.
So the idea would be, if it fits, you would put a horn mouthpiece into the sackbut hole.
Oh, I don't know, because he says, what does he say exactly?
French horn.
He says of French horn shape, and that leads me to believe that he was looking at a sackbut mouthpiece and seeing that it was similar to a French horn mouthpiece, but I can't say for sure, right?
Sense.
And I don't know, like, the performance history. I mean, I read that this wasn't performed during his lifetime, but I don't know if that's
No,
the
it
case.
was.
It was.
That recording
Yeah,
was made, and he participated in it.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, more research to be done there. And, it's a really interesting piece.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much.